Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Bengal Tiger Podcast. I'm Matthew Brune, and joining me once again is Shea Dixon. Shea, we are in the press box for our quick reactions of LSU versus Arkansas game that the Tigers pull out 34-31. It was through the first half. It looked like LSU was never going to be able to score 3 points going into the final minute of the second quarter, and then the second half, it's an offensive explosions for both teams. And LSU ends up pulling it out despite shooting itself in the foot a few times along the way.
It was not what we expected. We did not predict a back and forth affair to that degree.
Yeah, I feel like I was wrong about this game in a lot of ways, except that
you said they'd cover.
Yeah, I said 34-24, so I wasn't far off on the score, but I was wrong in a lot of other ways in how this game played out.
That's actually pretty nice, but you just didn't have the actual context at all correct. Okay, so let this sink in. And it just pulled up a second ago. A combined 600 for Arkansas and LSU. 935 yards of offense, 65 points. They combined to go 9 for 9 on red zone conversions. And for the fourth year in a row, it comes down to 3 points. Last year, we were talking about a 13-10 game where nobody could score. Mm-hmm. This year, nobody could get a stop.
Yeah, and I thought the quarterbacks were really good in this one. KJ Jefferson.
Certainly in the second half.
Certainly in the second half. Jayden had his lumps, and we'll talk about it, I think a lot on the mailbag probably, and write about it throughout the week. But Jayden in the second half especially picked up the level and kind of figured out, got in a rhythm, as Brian Kelly started to say. And as much as we've talked about the depth of the receiver room to a degree, Malik and Brian Thomas are the bell cows. They deliver again. Malik, 8 receptions for 130 yards, 2 touchdowns. Brian Thomas, 5 for, 120?
122?
133.
133?
Yeah, and 2 touchdowns. So
they both go 130 and above right there.
Yeah.
Both with 2 touchdowns. But Malik was targeted 14 times, caught it 8. So obviously he's their go-to guy. But Brian catching 5 of the 7, including on that free play where Jayden said, okay, I'm going to throw it deep. Brian had run a bit further than Jayden's usually throwing it. He comes back, gets it, tips it, catches it, makes a move, gets in. We've already said it, but it is so clear that he is the wide. It's the 1-2 punch there. And look, the only other people who caught passes were Mason Taylor, who returned at tight end, so it's good to see him back. Caught 3 passes for 3 of his 4 targets for 33 yards, but he had a long of 20. That was a really big play at the end of the game.
Yep.
And then Aaron Anderson gets the little pitch plays and a quick screen, caught them both, 14 yards. Nobody else caught a pass.
Yeah. So
and then I'm not even talking receivers. A week ago, the running backs caught a ton of passes. It was none of that tonight.
Yeah, I thought Arkansas came out and actually did a pretty good job. This is why I expected it to be closer. Obviously, we all went into the game kind of hoping LSU built on what it did last week against Mississippi State and kind of put together another really good performance in front of its home fans. But Arkansas, similar to last year, I thought was really well coached in this, played hard, played well, both sides of the ball. I thought to go back to a specific time period in the first half when Arkansas had 2 trips to the red zone and came away with 6 points, when LSU's offense seemed like it was never going to do anything. And to hold them to 6 points in those first 4 trips, I thought was huge. And I asked Greg Penn about it. He said the same thing. That was really what kept them in the game. And as we know, before halftime, it was 13-3. And then, obviously, Jayden hits the big touchdown pass to Malik to make it a 13-10 game going to half. And at that point, even as much as LSU fans wanted to panic, it felt like LSU controlled its own destiny in this game with how the game was going. And so that was a really big the defense we'll talk about. 426 yards allowed, 8 of 13 on third downs for Arkansas. Like I said, KJ Jefferson controlled the game in a lot of ways. The pass rush didn't hit the way we wanted it to hit. And so there's a lot that's going to be – I thought the secondary went back to being outmanned in a lot of situations. We saw Denver give up a touchdown pass. We saw, obviously, the bust for Zay Alexander. So the secondary wasn't great. A lot of things are going to have to be cleaned up. But ultimately, they did enough, I think, in the first half. And that's really all I'm focused on. Is the first half for the defense, they did enough to have LSU not in a 21-10 hole or 17-10 hole. It was 13-10, very, very manageable for this offense to come back from.
Yeah, and again, when it was 13-10 to that point, I believe Daniels was 7 for 15 passing. He had thrown a pick already.
Yep.
He had not eclipsed 100 yards. He wasn't rushing the ball well. He had a few sacks or a couple of sacks already. He had maybe 20 yards rushing on 7 or 8 carries. And we kind of all looked at each other and said, all right, if they're going into half losing by double digits and he's not playing well, like, is this the first time we're hitting a spot where, okay, they're going to put Nussmeier in and see if he can't spark it? And 15 seconds later, he hits Brian Thomas and they score. And then they come right out in the second half and do it again for another 49-yard touchdown to Brian Thomas. Then it was off to the races. But you're right, those early stops, that bend don't break, worked for him to force those couple of field goals. But on the third time down there they scored, that's when it was 13-3, and it felt like, oh, man, there's less than a minute left till half. Like, this is not a good look. Yeah. And that touchdown right before half changed everything for them.
Individually, we talked about the receivers. You've touched on this a lot throughout the season. They needed to be able to run the ball. First half, I believe the running backs had 5 carries. Jayden himself, I think, had 7, somewhere around there. Second half, we see Logan Diggs do what we expected Logan Diggs to do. And he ends the game with 14 carries for,
97 yards.
Yeah, 97 yards. I thought he was terrific. Caleb Jackson got a couple carries. Josh Williams broke a 41-yard run.
His only touch.
In the first half.
His only touch. 41-yard run.
Yeah, and that was in the first half. So that was really the only run game they had in the first half. Second half, I thought that was really, really big to get the run game going. Obviously, in the last drive, to put the game away, we see Logan Diggs. We see them start to weather the game. And, it wasn't pristine how they closed out the game inside the 5, but they did it about fairly well, I guess, and they got down with about 5 seconds left to kick the last field goal. So I thought the running game was really big, which we've talked about a lot throughout the year as well.
Yeah, and I'm a little surprised that they did not run the ball more through the game. Like Josh Williams popped that early 41-yard run, and Logan Diggs had gotten in for 2 runs or something in the first half and had carried them for 5 or 6 yards each, or maybe three runs, and I think he had gotten 20, 30 yards. And they just wanted to keep leaning on the pass. Now, I'm not going to knock Mike Denbrock here because the offense has been far from the issue to this 3-1 start. And, yes, they did not – they went punt, interception, punt to start the game. Then they have 6 more possessions in the whole game. They go field goal, touchdown, milk it, game-winning field goal, chip shot. Not even like a 40-something yarder that you have to worry about if you're going to hit or not. Very well played. It's funny, too, and maybe if you're watching the TV broadcast and then you're dealing with commercials, you're kind of keeping up with it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I noticed with however many much time left in the fourth, that they didn't have any time. Arkansas had no timeouts. And when it turned down to a couple minutes left and LSU started that drive, you're like, wait, Arkansas doesn't have any timeouts.
I did not realize it for some reason.
Right when they got down in the red zone, it became clear they were going to just sit on it, kick a field goal, win the game.
And I want to give a shout out to the crowd.
They were lit in the second half, as the kids say.
Arkansas ended the game with 6 false starts and a delay of game, and that's basically 35 yards. Obviously not directly from the crowd, but a product of them not being able to hear. I thought the crowd was energetic, it was charged up, and it really impacted this game, in my opinion.
The crowd can't play defense, though, so they still converted on some of those.
They did. They kept converting.
They just kept converting.
And what was it? The drive where they had 2 false starts, and then was that the play where they hit Hans on the big play?
Yeah.
Regardless, and then Harold Perkins gets called for roughing the passer at the end of the game, which ends up tying the contest up. Even still, after the roughing the passer call, the next play was a wide open Luke Hans touchdown, and those are the type of plays you just expect them not to give up initially.
And so you look at what a guy like Luke Haas did. He's a 2023 recruit, was a 4-star, football, basketball, track, 3-sport athlete. Yeah. It showed out there. As a true freshman, and Arkansas always has good tight ends.
Yeah.
But he goes out there and puts up
they couldn't guard him.
9 targets, 6 catches, 116 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Yeah. And he was wide open on that busted coverage. Yeah.
Speaking of freshmen, Whit Weeks
shout out
continues to just play amazing.
He looks really good at middle linebacker. Greg Penn had a very good game at middle linebacker. Yeah. Defensively, stat-wise, obviously, in a game like this, guys like that are playing linebacker are going to lead be up there in tackles. But Greg had 12. Whit had 9.
Yeah.
Greg had a sack. Whit was in on a sack. Whit had a quarterback hurry.
Yeah.
They both had some solo stops. So even with Omar Speight, your veteran, all Pac-12, I've started 40-something games across my career, transfer out now 2 games in a row. They've looked better at linebacker than they did the first 2 games.
Yeah, and if we get really into details, they didn't stop the run great, and that's not on the linebackers specifically. That's on the defensive front as a whole. But I don't think Omar fixes that per se. But that's probably the area, like the defensive line not dominating. I think I said on the preview podcast, I was like, I expect the defensive line to be the strength here, like it was against Mississippi State, and it was not. And so as a result, you had the linebackers having to make a lot more plays than I think I was expecting them to make. Mekhi Wingle was still very good. Mason Smith, we still haven't seen that explosion from him. Braden Swenson made a couple plays, but Ovi didn't. You go down the list, and it was a fine performance from the defensive line, but it really wasn't. It's hard to get pressure on KJ Jefferson. He's so tall, so big, and bring him to the ground. But he extended plays, as we know, and it really kept Arkansas in the game, them not being able to get a pass rush without blitzing. So that was one of the concerning aspects that I think we'll take moving forward is, can this defense get pressure with 4? And Harold Perkins had flashes again, but he's kind of, I don't want to say on and off, but they use him in different spots. So it's hard to really gauge his impact.
And we're not seeing an impact right now that you would want from Mason Smith, and maybe that's coming back from the injury, but he was getting pushed off the line tonight at different times, and you had seen him make a little progress in each of the 2 games he had played. This was maybe a step backwards, but Jordan Jefferson plays great, has a really good game.
Yeah.
There's been spots, Ovie Ogofu's been hurt, so he hasn't been able to do it all, but you have a guy like Braden Swenson come in and make some big plays. We saw Deshaun Womack have a big sack tonight. Perkins had a big sack. Brian Kelly said that he was standing there on the roughing the passer that ultimately changed a 4th and 18 at the end of the game to a first down that Arkansas went right down and scored on to tie the game before LSU got the game-winning field goal. Said he would send it in the SEC. He was like, what else is Perkins supposed to do? He was already coming. The momentum's there. He didn't take him he felt like he didn't do anything egregious.
And they couldn't get him to the ground all day, so they've been emphasizing make sure you try to tackle him whenever he's there.
Because he'll slip loose.
Yeah.
Now, we have not watched the tape. We sat there and watched it live, so we're not even hearing the broadcast of what they're talking about or hearing replays back. I don't know if it was all scheme. I don't know. So do you put it on a coordinator defensively, Matt House? I don't know if it was players just not being in the right spots or not making the right plays on all of these different miscues that lead to someone putting up 426 yards on you.
Yeah.
But that whatever it was is far from okay.
Yes.
Arkansas's dropping 30-something on you. And you didn't, for instance, and we are praising LSU and Denbrock for them to be able to go and put together, 5 or 6 scoring drives after a very sluggish start, obviously. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scoring drives in a row, including
for LSU,
including 4 touchdowns. But then you have to flip it to the other side. Arkansas was doing the same thing.
Scored on 5.
I mean, take out then when they got the ball back with like 20 seconds before half and they let it go out. They go field goal, touchdown, touchdown, and then they throw a pick on the Hail Mary. So even they were going right down the field. I don't know what the issue is. I do know that they seem to have a talent deficiency at DB.
Yeah, and it's
they didn't know where they were half the time.
Yeah, flat out. And if we look at it again, they bend but didn't break on those 2 field goals. So those were not good drives either. The 2 field goals to start the game. So we're looking at it as potentially 7 out of 10 drives not being good. And the 1 interception they had on KJ was on the first play where I guess KJ didn't see the safety coming down as far as he did. But regardless, that is concerning. And I think an interesting point here is last year Matt House's second halves were what we talked about. Now through Florida State and this game, Arkansas, they've basically haven't been able to get a stop in the second half. So that's an interesting development that we're going to see if that continues, because now you have Ole Miss and I'm not saying Ole Miss is a juggernaut offense. There's really not a juggernaut offense in the SEC this year. But still, they have Lane Kiffin, Jackson Dart, Judkins, all these players that are probably a better offense than Arkansas. And you're going to have to beat them on the road next week. So it's not going to get easier. They're going to have to figure things out. And now you don't have the home crowd to basically spot you 35 yards in these games. So it is worrisome. It is worrisome.
We'll unpack it more after we watch the film. But yes, we certainly note that that was not a good defensive performance. And I think that it was tough getting home at times on KJ Jefferson, where he was able to extend plays and obviously continue to move the sticks. But they do end up with, let's see how many total sacks. 4 sacks for LSU in this one.
And
Wingo's always going to play well. You're going to have guys like that.
Yeah, and in the run game, they did hold them to 3.7 yards per carry, which isn't terrible. And even if you take out the sacks, it was only 5 yards per carry, which sack adjusted wise isn't terrible. So it didn't feel like it was the worst performance. They got them to a lot of third downs, as we noted, 13. They just couldn't stop them on the key plays. Like those key plays, they couldn't stop them in the second half, and that's what loses you the game, or almost loses you the game ultimately. So. Like I said, we'll unpack it. We'll watch the film. We'll be back on Monday for our mailbag. I'm sure a lot of people will have great questions, but yeah.
Yeah, well, a couple more things before we get out. Obviously, a shout out to My Perfect Franchise, Andy Ludicky. Everyone knows they sponsor weekly our post-game instant reactions podcast. If you're ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream, or looking for that side hustle while working your current job, or wanting to diversify, build wealth, leave a legacy, Andy can help. It's in the name. He's a guy who can take whatever your interests are in a franchise, whether it's at a very low level, whether it's wanting to make this your primary income, and walk you through it all. myperfectfranchise.net, or call him at 404-973-9901. Andy Ludicky is the guy to know, and he's helping out a lot of On3 sites. A lot of people from our site at the Bengal Tiger have been using him. So again, no matter what it is in terms of what you might be able to kind of venture into in the franchise world and becoming a franchisee, or at least having questions about what it entails. That's what he does every day of his life. So give him a call, 404-973-9901, or email him at andy@myperfectfranchise.net. Okay, let's wrap up here with this. Ole Miss lost to Bama today.
They did.
Everyone in the SEC West has a loss now. And LSU is the first team to get to 2 wins in the SEC West, 2-0. A&M's 1-0, Bama's 1-0. And obviously Mississippi, Auburn, Arkansas now are all 0-1. State's 0-2. You look over at the East.
This division.
Kentucky's 4-0. Georgia's 4-0. Missouri, who LSU's about to play, is 4-0.
Yeah, man.
Safe to say that the East is flexing on the West at this point.
This conference is something else right now. I said it going into the year. I thought Missouri was kind of a sneaky tough game. I don't think it's the toughest game by any means outside of Alabama or A&M, but it is a game where I'm looking at Missouri and being like, that's on the road. You're going to have to come to play. This isn't a pushover game. This isn't Vanderbilt. You're playing here. And then, as we mentioned, Ole Miss up next. Mississippi State, I still don't think is good. Auburn, I don't think is good. Everybody else in your schedule can beat you, pretty much. That's where I'm at with this. Auburn's at home, too, isn't it? Because last year was on the road. Yeah. So I'm not worried about Auburn. But other than that, every other game in the SEC, I'm looking at with how wide open it is and as many flaws as we know every team has,
sure,
including LSU. Everybody has their flaws. It's going to come down to execution, coaching, all the intangible things that you can name, because I can't look at the SEC West and say they are definitely the best team in the SEC West. Like, if I'm doing it, it's Alabama and LSU at the top, but I can't really say that they won't lose to, an A&M or an Ole Miss and so on and so forth. Ole Miss has some chances against Alabama, couldn't take them. They lose that game. So,
and kudos to Missouri here. Getting the 4-0 start, building momentum by not playing an SEC team yet.
Yes, Kansas State.
Go ahead and build up a little 4-0 start and see what happens. But yes, next week at Ole Miss. Ole Miss does have an explosive offense. Jackson Dart going into this week had been playing very well. A lot of his numbers looked like Jayden Daniels, where he was throwing for a lot. His touchdown to interception ratio was good, and he was running the ball a good bit.
Yeah,
they put up 10 points today in Tuscaloosa.
I still think he is very capable. Alabama's defense, as we know, is elite. I think that's safe to say. Even if it didn't feel elite in spots throughout the year, it's still very much a talented defense.
Yeah, I think the thing to take away, and again, we'll talk more in the Monday mailbag and next week about this, but was this pretty? No. Did they cover the 17-point spread and make a dominant win? No. But right now, and this is what matters when you're in a race for the SEC West, nobody else is doing that either. No. So it is all still in front of them after that Florida State loss, and it's 1-0 every week, and they're 3-1 overall in the season right now, and you turn the focus to Ole Miss.
And spoiler alert, across the country, nobody looks like they're a real dominant team right
No.
now. Ohio State, Notre Dame go down to the wire. Obviously, we know Georgia is
Michigan
is
hadn't
good.
really been tested.
Michigan hasn't been tested. So you go down the list of teams, and
Georgia fools around with half the teams they play.
You think Texas is a good team. We'll see what they look like. Against Oklahoma and other teams. So it's SEC West is in front of you. Obviously the SEC is in front of you, and you kind of go from there. Who were your game ball predictions?
Oh, yeah, let's before we close out. I did Logan Diggs, who I think had a good game, but I wouldn't call it the best. Brian Thomas got Brian Kelly's game ball, so he's got to get the nod there, but Logan Diggs played well. Defensively, I thought Denver Harris would have a pick. He did not. Andre Sam did. And I would probably say for the second week in a row that Whit Weeks or Greg Penn was your best defender, or certainly most important to the game. And then I said Deshaun Womack would make a big hit on special teams, and maybe they'd get a fumble, but that didn't happen. He did have a sack, so he didn't even need his helmet.
Without his helmet, and then started dancing.
And you went Nathan Dybert to kick it off deep. They did that. So you win that one. You went with Harold Perkins. He had a sack.
He was
again, a couple of the linebackers played well, and then you went with
Will Campbell. Didn't I? Well, maybe he did because I didn't really notice.
I don't know who had the penalty.
Those are the ones we have to go back and watch. I said he wasn't gonna have a penalty and he wasn't gonna allow a sack. I don't think he allowed a sack.
He wasn't the offense guy, anyways. It was Brian Thomas.
It wasn't. Or Malik.
They put up identical stats, but I'll give it to Brian. If he can do it on 5 on 7 targets and not 8 on 14, that's better.
And I have been. I definitely was not critical of Brian, but I was saying I still needed to see Brian Thomas kind of show us a little bit more throughout the season. Florida State, he had the big numbers. I didn't think he showed us. Mississippi State, he had a good game. I thought that was the first signs of him. Today, I think, was his best game of the season, and I think it was obviously the best game of his career. And this is kind of what I needed to see from him in terms of yards after catch, in terms of making plays that weren't really given. I don't want to say given to him, but schemed up for him to a degree. Malik was bracketed, yes, but Brian Thomas playing at this level is what this team needs. Because throughout fall camp, I said, I don't know who the second best receiver is right now. And obviously it was probably Brian, but I needed to see this type of performance. And at this point, you have the 1-2 punch of these two guys. I don't care who your third receiver is. Just throw Aaron Anderson out there for all I care.
And he got the looks today.
Yeah.
I will close out by saying that these are games that are going to happen with Jayden Daniels. And a year ago in this game, granted, it was a little banged up, but played very poorly, and it remained that way across 4 quarters. He played poorly to start the game, let's call it for a quarter, and then they went in the final 6. They went punt, interception, punt. After that, they scored on every single drive, and they scored touchdowns on 4 of them. And he got them all the way down, gets them down to the 1 to kick that field goal at the end or whatever it was. So, yes, there'll be moments where or drives or, strings of drives where you say, man, this is frustrating. And it might happen to right out of the gates. And you're like, gosh, we're getting closer to halftime now.
This is scary. Yeah.
This is a little nervous moment. But he delivers. Yeah. And that's what you want. And didn't happen every time last year. So far this year, he has at least put together solid play through games. Obviously, second half of Florida State got away from him, but we'll see. They've cleaned up now with wins against what could be viewed as the lower tier teams in the SEC West. Yeah. So Ole Miss on tap next.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Jayden Daniels, not perfect, but there's not many quarterbacks in the country that are perfect.
No, but and as Brian Kelly said, you got to calm down, get in rhythm, and he did.
Yeah, so credit to Jayden Daniels there. All right, thank y'all for joining us for our Instant Reaction podcast. Leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, and let us know what you think on the board, on everything. So, we'll talk to y'all on Monday for the Monday mailbag.